Hi guys, welcome back to my channel, or welcome if you're new. My name is Chelsea and I'm really excited you're here today because I'm going to do my January wrap-up video. I had a really good month of reading. I'm super excited. Crescent City 3 comes out in a couple of days, so I'm doing this wrap-up a little early just to, prep my brain and my heart for that book that's coming out in a couple of days. So I'm really excited. But before we get started, I read a bunch of books this month. I'm gonna do kind of a brief summary review of each book. I will give stars to each book, but I don't know, I'm not very good at rating things. I change my mind daily, so I guess don't hold these stars against me or hold me accountable for them because it'll probably change in like 3 days. So that's you. So how I was originally going to do this was just go in order of what I read, but I think it'd be more fun to do kind of the worst to the best, just to leave on a happy notes. But I had a really good month of reading, so let's just get through the stinkers first. So first up, I read Never by Jessa Hastings. This book is very, very pretty. It was a cover by. I also just really liked the little description on the back. It's sort of like a Peter Pan and Wendy retelling. Only our main character's name is Daphne, and she already knows about Peter Pan. She's Wendy's granddaughter. And so her grandmother and her mother were taken by Peter Pan when they were young women. And so she, at the beginning of the book, it's set in the 1960s in London, which is kind of interesting. The setup of this book is great. So that's why I'm a little disappointed that I didn't like it more. And this cover obviously is really pretty. I did like the writing style, but so she gets taken by Peter Pan. They're aged up a little bit, which I think was just so there could be more of an actual romance. And I've read a few Peter Pan kind of retellings. So I guess what I thought was gonna happen in this book was that Peter Pan would be kind of the guy who gets her to Neverland, and then she actually ends up falling for the Captain Hook character. So in this book, Hook's son is a love interest of hers as well as Peter Pan. And so he brings her to Neverland, and kind of just goes from there, and just her life there. It's kind of, I don't want to say I hated this book. I only gave it 2 stars. And while I did like the writing and would like to read other things by this author, it was just kind of a frustrating read. I didn't really enjoy it. I read it very quickly, so it was an easy read, but it really left a lot to be desired. There's a weird kind of, and I don't know, it's not just this book. Sometimes other books kind of skeeve me out because they make a really big deal out of her turning 18. Counting down the days, she says a couple times she's gonna be 18 in a couple weeks or something like that. So there's a little bit of a ick factor there. I probably would have overlooked it if I enjoyed the plot and or characters. I think the reason I didn't like this book is I actually just didn't like the characters at all. I didn't really like our main character. I think she was a bit lost, which was probably on purpose, but she didn't really know what she wanted. Like I said earlier, I was kind of prepared for Peter Pan to be kind of a jerk, which he was. And it was an interesting way to take the character, but then the Hook character ended up being Red Flag City and kind of weird too. So I guess that my frustration was I didn't really get the point of this book because they really didn't explore any other characters that much. The location, it just seems like such a fun world, and that we really didn't do too much with it or go anywhere really. She's kind of in between these two guys, but also not really. There's a lot of discussions of fate, which I guess maybe her mother and grandmother kind of put in her, but I don't really get why she thinks her fate is to be here and to be with Peter Pan, especially because in the beginning she really wanted to like go to school and have like her own life. And now that she's there, she's, I guess, second guessing that. And there's also a trope in this that is super annoying. There's like a memory loss thing in this, and I just don't, again, it's not just this book, I just don't really like that trope. It really makes me think of when I used to watch soap operas when I was little, and you know, there's always a memory loss thing, and then they end up remembering anyway. It just sort of seems like a way to kill time in a story that had a lot of premise, and they could have done a little more just, I don't know, interesting stuff going on with the world. There was a few different other characters, but they were pretty interchangeable to me. Yeah, I don't want to go on like a full rant. I don't really want to be too negative. It just wasn't, it's not even that I hated it. It was just very frustrating. I didn't get the point if we were supposed to, like maybe we were supposed to like one of these guys, maybe we were supposed to root for her being there. I didn't feel that. I kind of felt nothing after reading this book. Again, I read it really quickly. It wasn't a hard read, and I'm excited to read. I know this author also did the Magnolia Park series, which is a series that is on my TBR, and I need to get to. I didn't get to it this month. I just think it could have been more interesting, and maybe the romance could have been an intense, interesting love story, or even like a love triangle, and I just didn't feel it for either guy, and our main character I didn't love. So that's it. Very pretty book, kind of sad it wasn't more fun to read or interesting. Cut the break. And now my next book, also a little disappointing. It was the first book I read this year, and I wanted to start the year off kind of light and just have, you know, a fun romance. And this was a book that I saw everywhere and heard really good things about. It's The 7-Year Slip by Ashley Poston. I swear I saw this everywhere at the end of the last year, and everyone was raving about it. This was kind of a miss for me. I didn't hate it. Again, I didn't love it. I've actually really haven't thought much about it since I stopped reading it. So I ended up giving this 3 stars, which for me is still considered like a good read. Like it's not awful. It's nothing I care about. I would never reread this. I probably wouldn't recommend it to anybody, but it was fine. It was a book. The love story, I just didn't really buy it. I don't know what it was. There was a bit too much cringe in the writing that I just couldn't get into it. But the setup was so fun. Again, just like never. It was a fun setup that just was disappointing. So basically, we're following Clementine. She lives in New York City. And I do like kind of the magical elements of this book. And so she lives in New York City. She's living in her aunt's old apartment. Her aunt has passed away. And she's pretty just like work obsessed, doesn't really have a life. And her apartment has some sort of magical ability where she comes home one night and there's a man there. And this should be either really scary or kind of a funny setup. And I think it's supposed to be a funny setup. But basically there's something magical in this apartment where like people who are 7 years apart can be in the apartment at the exact same time. But the second you leave the apartment, like they can't come with you or anything like that. So this man was invited to stay and kind of sublet the apartment over the summer by her aunt. And he is 7 years in the past. And she doesn't realize that at first, but it's just kind of weird. And then pretty much there's a love story that's going on with her and this guy from the past. And then she meets him in her present day, and they're like talking, and she's kind of slowly realizing, you know, who he is, and he knows who she is. I think that was another weird thing, is like, you already know who each other are. You already know each other. Like, it's just kind of weird that we're taking this long to kind of get to the point. But it was okay. The guy, the love interest, is a chef. So 7 years in the past, he's more of an aspiring chef. And when she meets up with him in the future, he's doing very well for himself. He has his own restaurant and is really well known. I guess, again, the weird cringe of some of the lines and just the overall storytelling just wasn't for me. I could see if you got past some of those lines, you wouldn't care. I guess I just didn't really buy their romance. It seemed kind of like too forced for me. Again, she like runs into him, and it sounds kind of like the beginning of a horror movie, but she doesn't really question him. And I can understand if she thinks there's something magical happening, but it's very odd because like a couple hours goes by and they're like slow dancing in the kitchen. She's like not afraid of him, or she is afraid of him when she first sees him, and then like, I don't know, it's just like a few hours go by and then they're just fine and now they're like falling in love. It just, I guess that started the me not really buying it thing. And then, yeah, in the future, or his future, her present day, he's talking to her and he's just like obviously in love with her and obsessed, but acting as though they can't get together because she needs to like see the rest of what their relationship was in the past. I don't know. I didn't really get it. So unfortunately, this was kind of a miss, which is sad because I want to get more into some different fun contemporary romances. And even though this one had a really fun magical element, it just wasn't fun. I don't know. Okay, so I did actually have a very good reading month. So I'm glad we got those two out of the way because the rest of them are like 4 stars and up. And I ended up finding like one of my new favorite beloved like all-time series this month too, which I did an entire video on because I was so obsessed with it. So next I read The City of Ruin by Sharissa Weeks. This is the sequel to The Witch Collector. Wow, I'm talking to myself. This was the sequel to the Witch Collector series, which I read right at the end of last year. And I devoured that book. It was a library Libby book that I read over a series of a couple of days. And while I did really like this second book, this is the second book of the series, I don't want to get too deep into the plot. But it was a pretty wild ending. It took me a little longer to read this one than the first one. I kind of started and stopped it quite a few times in this month. I think the pacing was just a little different from the first one. I liked some of the character development. I really liked that we got to see more from our main character's sister. She had her own like POV chapters, and I really like where this series is headed. This was kind of like a second book syndrome-y book for me. There was just some lulls. I had a little bit of trouble in the first book caring about our two main two main characters. They had kind of an enemies to romance sort of thing. But it's very cool. Our main character is deaf. In the beginning of the first book, she is waiting for the Witch Collector, who is the love interest, to come, and he usually takes like witches, like she lives in a small town, and he like takes them away from their families, and you never see them again. Her sister was taken years previously, and she holds a vendetta against him and then the king he works for. So she's like out for blood and is basically a cool badass who wants to kill him. They end up kind of having to work together and travel together in the first book, and the romance kind of sparks from there. And then there's more explanation of who the real evil is in this world and the reason he's been doing things. So anyway, I did really like this book. I think the spice level in this book was really great. And the way that I'm trying to not really give away the ending, but I'm very interested in continuing on with this series. I didn't realize the next book was a novella. I looked it up in the library, and I think I might just read the novella just to prep myself for the next book, because that one doesn't come out for a couple of months. So I'm excited to figure out what happens with their story. I think even though I wasn't totally in on their romance in the first book, the second one I liked the spice level, and I liked some of the stuff that happened between them, and the way that this ended, I think there will be some very interesting character stuff in the next one. I can't really even imagine what it's gonna be like after the end. I guess if you've read it, you know. So while I love the ending, I feel like this was this whole month where I read so many really good books, and the endings were all insane, bizarre, and immediately made me want to read like the next book. While there was some really good bits, and like I said, there was a little bit of a pacing thing. Might have been because I started and stopped the book a few different times. There was a weird memory trope thing, which I don't care about. Lost memory stuff, I don't know why. It's just not something that I care about, because I'm always just like, they're gonna remember and it's gonna not matter. But I am really excited to continue with the series. Maybe I'll get this novella read sooner than later, and then I'll be able to read this book when it comes out. We have another 4-star read. This is my only other contemporary romance I read this month. It's The Simple Wild by K.A. Tucker. And this was a really nice palate cleanse because I read it immediately after I finished this long series that I read. And I can be very hit or miss with contemporary romances. I don't know why. Some are just really great and some of them I find either boring or annoying. I really liked the plot in this story. It was a good read. I loved it. In this story, we follow our main character and her, in the beginning of the book, her parents split up because her mother can no longer live in Alaska. It's not for her. Her father owns a airline, like a small air company, a small airline in Alaska, and they're kind of like roughing it, but that's his love, his passion is that. And she's more of a city lady and she just can't. She tried, she lived there for a few years, and while they both really love each other, they're kind of going their separate ways, and she's taking her daughter with her. Cut to future, where we have our girl, her name's Callie, I think. They live in Toronto, and she gets a call. She literally loses her job the same day. She gets this call from someone who's a friend of her father's, who's still in Alaska, who she hasn't really talked to in many years, not since she was like a kid. And he's really sick, he has lung cancer, and they want her to come and spend some time with him because he's not doing well. And so she just lost her job. She's kind of ending things with this boyfriend that she had. She just thinks this is a good time to go back to Alaska, kind of hash things out with her dad, and just see if there can be a relationship at all there. This was a really good plot. There was it was sad at times. It was very realistic to how people are in real life and different people, communication styles and how that affects relationships with parents or other people. It's a really good opposites attract romance. Once she's there, she runs into Jonah, who works for her father, and he's one of the pilots, and he's kind of more of a rough outdoorsy kind of Alaska dude. They are not in Anchorage, Alaska. They're really out in the middle of nowhere, frozen tundra, and it's summertime, and she's definitely a city girl. They're just complete opposites. She calls him a Yeti. He calls her Barbie. She's very I don't know how to explain her without being mean. I like her, but she's very over the top, just so not a country person, I would just say. I like so much so that I don't even think she realized how ridiculous she was being at times. But I think the reason I liked her was she was very realistic, even though she was in her late 20s, but she was just the type of person to put on a full face of makeup even when she was just going out to run in the middle of nowhere, Alaska. So if you could imagine, her and this guy just were complete opposites, but then they had a really cute love story. There was a lot of good tension. It was great. I really liked their banter. I really liked that she got closer to her father and they got to be able to hash some stuff out. And like I said, I thought the plot flowed really well even without the romantic elements. The only thing I kind of wished was the spice was kind of not there in this book, which it doesn't have to be in every book. It was just sort of I enjoyed their banter and the start of their relationship so much that once they got over themselves and accepted that they both liked each other, then there wasn't really much happening because it was just sort of okay, we're together now. It would have just been more fun to see kind of their characters during more intimate times. That's all I'm saying. But I really liked it. I would say the reason it's not even higher on my list is just because I was so amped to start. There's more to the series. There's a few more books. I was really amped the second I got done with this one. I was just oh, I want to get right into this next one. And then I haven't had time yet. And now that I've had a few more days away from it, I'm kind of okay, I did like this book, but now I'm not as excited to read. I'll probably will read the next one. But the next one doesn't sound like they're already together, so I think that relationship isn't going to be the main point of the next couple books, which could be interesting because if she's going to try to make it in Alaska, that was a different interesting part of this book too. Is just that she's so not that person, and it took her a while to kind of click into who she would have to be there. So yeah, this book made me definitely want to take a vacation of some sort to Alaska. And I think I will probably read these other ones at some point. I had such a good month of fantasy romances that I wasn't even expecting to be anything. I thought they were just gonna be like fun little reads, but I ended up really, really liking these, and I wasn't even sure what order to put them in. But my next read was The Everking by L.J. Andrews. This is another fantasy romance. I really, really enjoyed this book a lot. I think this book had a good plot as well as romance, which sometimes they can be better plots, better romances. I think this book just really had like both, they did both of these things really well. I gave it 4 stars. We pretty much are in this land where there's fae, and our main character is like a land fae, and then there's these like water fae, and then there's the Ever Kingdom. And I'm not gonna get too deep into the plot, but it's so fun. They met when they were younger. Our male character was actually imprisoned, and she goes and reads to him when they were young, and they kind of have this very sweet like relationship. Years later, he is banished from this kingdom, but something happens where he can come back, and he's kind of like a pirate king. He has, you know, his boat and his whole crew. There's really good side characters in this story as well. And he comes to this kingdom and he steals her. She's kind of like a princess type. Her dad is this like big powerful king, and he's away, so they steal her. And they have this really beautiful like slow burn romance throughout this book. They have this beautiful slow burn romance throughout this book. Everyone's kind of trying to either overthrow him in his own kingdom or kill her. He starts becoming really protective of her. She has an ability. His kingdom's kind of going through like a plague situation, and she has this ability to heal the land and help his people. And yep, they get closer, and the ending, this is another one where the ending was just really wild, but I think I just liked the story overall. It was really addicting to read. I really liked the love interest. I really loved the characters a lot, and the plot was really, really fun. There was a few kind of inconsistencies or a few things that didn't really make sense, but it was such a fun read that I just didn't care. And I didn't realize it was part of a duology. So the second book actually comes out, or I think it just came out in the end of January. So haven't read that yet, but very excited to. I probably will make sure I read it in February, because when this book ended, I was just kind of like, what? Because obviously her family is looking for her, trying to find her. You know, she was taken by this evil king, but they don't know that he's actually not that evil, that they've actually come together, and she's helping him, and they're in a like relationship now. The next book is called Ever Queen, so hopefully we get a little more character development for her. While I really liked her a lot, and I'm not saying every fantasy, you know, romance heroine has to be like some badass with a sword, but she just kept kind of being stolen away by people. She does defend herself a few times in this book, but I'm kind of hoping she just like gets a little more like finding her own way and is able to kind of handle herself a little bit better, because I'm just kind of sick of her being like taken from different people, which is kind of what happens at the end of this book. And then he's sort of left in a bad situation because he's going after her, and there was like basically like a traitor amongst his crew. But a lot of really fun elements in the story. I can't wait to read the second book, because I'm sure I'm gonna just absolutely love it. Okay, so I have another fantasy romance. It was a really good month for that. A Court That's Cruel and Lovely by Stasia Stark. I don't know why I always feel like I'm saying that name wrong. This was another really great fantasy romance where the plot was great, the romance elements were great. Another ending that I didn't see coming, which I really should have seen it coming, but when it happened, I was like, oh, that makes sense. I know it's a trilogy, and I'm really excited to hopefully keep reading it in February. I was so close to reading the rest of these books in this month, but I ended up getting addicted to another series, so that kind of took my entire life away in a good way. This was another 4-star read. It was a really good first book in a fantasy trilogy. I have high hopes for this world. I know I only gave it 4 stars, but a lot of my favorite fantasy series, the first book isn't necessarily the best out of it, but I see the potential in this series, and I think it's gonna go some really fun places. And so basically we start off, our main character's name is Priska, I think? It's been a little while since I read this, but it was, she's basically got a forbidden power. Where she's from, when you're a baby, your power gets taken away, and then when you're, I think, 25, it's given back to you. But some people have their power still. And there's this whole kind of corrupt system and reasoning for all of this. But she is kind of waiting, she's not quite 25 yet, so she's kind of waiting and like planning to flee and run, because once she's found out that she still has this power, they just legitimately like murder you and your family. So something ends up happening in her town where her power gets shown. She has to use her power to try to help. So the jig is up. She has to flee, and then she runs into this mercenary type guy and his crew. And this is such a fun enemies to lover romance because he wants nothing to do with her. She's really struggling and in trouble at this point in the story. And he is just kind of like, no, I don't want to help her. And she hates him. And then they run into each other again, and he realizes she has this power that's going to be really useful for him and his crew and what they're trying to accomplish. So he ends up taking her with him and like helping her develop her power. And then there's this whole kind of rebel like storyline that also happens that she's a part of with her brother. And the beginning of this book was really, really great. It's very fast paced. It was just kind of like one thing after another. And just like the stakes were high throughout the whole book. And then when we got to more of they get to the city and they're in the palace, it slows down a little bit, but then other parts of the story are very like fun, are very interesting during this part, and their romance during this part is just great because they end up meeting back up. Our love interest, Lorien, is so mysterious yet funny, and the end of the book I'm just so looking forward to the next book. It was just so much fun. I think our main character is one of the best ones I've read lately. She is a badass and she's really awesome, and I like the reasoning, her choices, and her character development. I just think she's going to be really great in these next books, and I have really high hopes for the rest of the series. So then we have Six Scorched Roses by Carissa Broadbent. I gave this book 5 stars. Carissa Broadbent has become one of my favorite fantasy romance authors in the last year or so. She wrote the Crowns of Naxia series. This is actually a novella that goes with that series that I didn't read in order at the time for whatever reason. I don't generally read novellas. I've read a few, but this really made me want to read more novellas because she did so much in this book that's only a couple hundred pages long, and it's just 5 stars. I loved it. I want to read everything that she writes. I'm so excited to read Slaying the Vampire Conqueror. I think I'm going to read in February. I absolutely loved our main character, Lilith, and the love interest, what was his name? Val. He and her, he's a vampire, and she is trying to figure out a way to help her community. There's this awful plague or like sickness that has taken this community, and her sister is really, really ill, and she was born deathly sick, and she's always been like sickly her whole entire life. And he's a vampire, and she believes that his blood will help her figure out, because she's a scientist, she wants to figure out how to save everybody. And yeah, I don't know how she made such a compelling and amazing romance in such a short period of time, but I loved this. I love these characters. It was really, really well done. It made me want to reread The Ashes and the Starcursed King, just because that was the second book in the duology that these two were in, and I remember liking their characters, but I didn't know their backstory. So this was just such a good novella. I can't wait for Carissa Broadbent to come out with more books. I'm gonna read Slaying the Vampire Conqueror next month, hopefully. And yeah, I can't wait for her to come out with more books. She's one of my favorite authors. And then last but not least, obviously, my favorite book of the month is actually 6 books that I read an entire series within a week. I did a whole video on it because I just couldn't not talk about it. I don't even know if the video made sense. I was just in such a, I was just obsessed with these books, and when I finished them, I just couldn't, I didn't even know what to do with myself. I loved them so much. So I read the Bonds That Tie series by Jay Bray. I meant to just read the first one, Broken Bonds, And like I said with a few of these others, I really wanted to continue reading the rest of the series when I finished this book, the first book, but I wanted to read the rest of my TBR and get through all these other series because I wasn't expecting to like everything as much as I did. And this one, I just immediately got sucked into. I loved it. I don't know really what else to say just because I did that whole video about it. But I had just finished it, so I think I harped on the ending a lot more when the beginning of this story was amazing. I love our main character, Ollivander. She's a badass. I had such good female main characters this whole month that I'm just like, they were awesome. So basically what happens, this is a Why Choose reverse harem fantasy romance set in a world that has some magical elements where there's gifted people and they bond with different people. We have our main character who her mom died in a car accident with her bonded, and then she had to go for reasons. She was on the run for like 5 years, and then her bondage, there's 5 guys that she's bonded to and she's like the main person, finally find her and drag her back, and they hate her, she hates them because they're basically forcing her to be compliant and stay with them, and she doesn't want to stay with them. And yeah, it's just like an enemies to lover romance, which was done really, really well. The first book or two was sort of a bully romance because everybody in this town and at this school that she's now attending hates her. Basically because these guys are like supposedly so great that they're just like, why would she run away from them? She's awful. So they're so awful to her, everybody in this whole school. And then the guys, they slowly realize kind of her reasoning and stuff happens. I have a whole spoiler video. We don't have to get into all that. But basically they want to still bond with her because their power sets, when you bond with your bonded, like you get supercharged basically. So they all kind of still want to bond even though they hate this person and don't understand why she left. And then she's terrified of having her powers being charged up because she has kind of scary powers, and there's these like evil forces that want to use her against the world basically because she's that powerful. And then the slow burn romance between each guy is amazing, and I really, really just loved the story. This is just a new 5-star love of all time for me. I can't wait to read more by J. Bree. I want more from this world. I don't know if she'll end up doing anything else in this world or follow another group of people just because it's tied up pretty well at the end, even though I just wanted more. And yeah, I read it in a week, all 6 books. They're beautiful and they're amazing. If you like fantasy romances and enemies to lovers and any of that, you will absolutely love this series. I've only read this series by her, but there's another one that I'm really, really interested in getting into, so I might do that next month too. And I can't wait to hopefully, after I give myself some time, I want to reread this series already so bad. The second I was done, I just wanted to start over and reread it. I can't even explain to you how addicting and amazing the series was. So definitely read that if you like fantasy romance at all. I think you'll like it a lot. So that was my January wrap up. I had a really great month of reading. I found some new all-time loves and a few different series that I'm so excited to continue. If you haven't already, please like and subscribe to my channel, and I'll see you guys in the next video. Side note, I love shadow magic. I mean, hello. Put that in every book. Have romantic spice scenes with shadow magic people in every book. I will eat it up. I love it so, so much. It was just great.